Oh boy. Whoa. Okay, so once again, having some difficulties. I was just told that the Facebook stream stopped, but I think it started again. Okay, hopefully we're past our technical difficulties. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Fantastic to be with you. Let's light up the darkness. Okay. That, by the way, was Mendel and Zalman Simons brothers, the Simons brothers, singing Boikala. They were singing at a wedding, actually. Boikala, the words from that are from Lecha Dodi, the song that we sing on Friday nights when we welcome the Sabbath bride. So they were reapplying it and welcoming the bride at a wedding. And of course, they were using the melody from Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen. Beautiful, beautiful song. I hope you enjoy that. Okay, here we go. Who's with us tonight as we get it going on a Tuesday night? Looks like we're active on both Facebook and YouTube, thank God. Yehudit in Florence, South Carolina. Melissa in Great Neck. Renee in Indy. Janice, great to see you here in Dallas. I'll be reading your dedication in one moment. Stephen in Dover. Rochelle in Modesto. James in Indy. Sharon in Lebanon, Delana Renee, shalom from Lockhart, Texas. Welcome, Delana. Bill Eldridge, shalom, believe it or not. From the title, it sounds like today's daf might be relevant to my thesis. Good timing. Okay. Chaim in Charlotte, Paul in Chicago, Randy in Florida, Santosh Kumar says, God always good. Amen. Gail in Virginia, Lucy in Minnesota, Dorothy in Pennsylvania. Bill recognized the melody. Sharon says that the Maccabees also do a beautiful Lecha Dodi to Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. Beautiful. Farah with us from Pakistan. Always good to see you, Farah. Jill in Willamette, John in Sedona, Carmen in Portland, and Marion in Medford, Long Island in New York. Over there on the YouTube side, Marjorie in Georgia, Gigi in Vancouver, Lindsay in Cincinnati, and Joseph recognized that it was Leonard Cohen, and he says shalom. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's class is dedicated by Janice Schwartz, a really beautiful dedication. She's dedicating our learning tonight to the memory of her mom, Mincha Bat Eliezer, and this is her 5th yahrzeit, meaning that tonight is the anniversary, the 5th anniversary of Janice's mom, of Mincha's passing from this world. It's a beautiful thing to do, to dedicate learning on a yahrzeit. And so we pray that the merit of our learning tonight accrues to Mincha Bat Eliezer in the next world. May it take her even higher than she already is. May her neshama have a great aliyah. May her soul have a great elevation in the world of souls. We say amen. And Janice, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. Thank you for supporting our nonprofit. It helps us enormously to share Torah with the world. And we say amen. Okay. Where are we now? Okay, so let me just get adjusted. All right, where are we holding? This is Daf Nun Beis, page 52 here in Tractate Pesachim, the Laws of Passover. This is the 4th volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 4. And continuing our discussion of the first Mishna here in chapter 4, just confirming that, yes. Okay, So basically what we've been talking about is the strength of custom, the importance of custom. Above all, there's the Torah law, right? So something that God said through his prophet Moses is written in the law, in the Torah, you must do or you must not do. So that's Torah law, right? And then we have rabbinic decrees, where the rabbis will look into the Torah, and basically to protect us from coming to violate laws in the Torah, they will issue rabbinic decrees of various sorts, again, telling us what we must do or what we must not do. And then the next level is minig, right? So depending on how you pronounce it, minhag or minig, if you're saying it quickly. And this means custom, right? So the custom of a place, over time, can acquire the force of law. And that is what we're discussing here. Initially, what we're talking about is with respect to working on the morning before Passover begins in the evening. Passover begins on the night, the 15th of Nisan. That afternoon, for sure, everybody is prohibited from working, right? So by Torah law, for sure you can't work on the first day of the festival. I believe the rabbis finally determined that it's a Torah law that we can't work on the afternoon, maybe, right, of the 14th of Nisan. Why? Because we have to slaughter the Paschal lamb, and we're busy with that. A little unclear if that's a Torah law or if it's a rabbinic decree. For sure, by rabbinic decree, you cannot work after midday, right, after midday. And we have that elsewhere, like before Shabbos or any Yom Tov, we can't work from Mincha, the afternoon prayer on, and then some dispute whether the earliest time of saying Mincha or the latest time of saying Mincha, but there's no more work anymore as we're preparing for the festival or for Shabbos. Now, the rabbis on Passover, because there's so much to do, they said from midday on. But in some communities, they don't even do work on the morning of the 14th, right? When we're searching our homes for chametz, for leaven, etc., and getting rid of it. There's just so much to do that in some places they decreed by custom, it just became the custom that they don't even work in that morning. But in other communities, they do allow work in the morning. Everyone agrees that you can work during the night until sunrise. But some communities, they also prohibit work in the morning, and some communities allow it. And then the question becomes, well, if you come from one sort of community where they allow work and you go to a place where they don't allow work, so then you shouldn't work. Why? So you don't cause machlokas, so you don't cause a dispute. Particularly if you're a Torah scholar and then you're going to go to this place where they don't do work in the morning and they're going to see you doing work. That's going to create a dispute in their community, so the sages said, don't do it, right? So the sages said you adopt the stringencies of both places. So therefore, even if you go to a place where they do work, but you come from a place where they don't work, so while you're visiting, you shouldn't work either. Is that going to cause a dispute? No, because if you're not working because it's the place that you came from, no one's even going to notice that you're not working in a place where they do work because you're just a visitor and they're going to assume you have no work to do except, get yourself ready for Passover that night. All right, that's the context of what we're talking about here in this Mishnah. Okay, now with kind of a very similar question. So what happens if you're talking now not about the morning before Passover and not the first day of Passover, but the second day of Passover? Now, so in the second day of Passover, if you're in the land of Israel, so that's just one of the intermediate days of Passover, and you're allowed to work. You're certainly allowed to work on the intermediate days of Passover. The first day is a full-fledged festival. The middle days, you can't eat bread. You can't eat leavened bread. You still have that restriction that you can only eat matzah if you're going to eat bread. But in terms of going to work, you can go to work. However, the second day outside of Israel in the diaspora is considered like the first day. It's a 2-day festival. No work is permitted on both days when you're outside Israel. As we've discussed before, the reason you have 2-day Yom Tov, a 2-day festival when you're outside of Israel, is because of custom, a custom that goes all the way back to the time when did a new month begin? when the new moon was sighted by witnesses who then came to Jerusalem and testified before the Sanhedrin and said, we saw the new moon, and they're questioned exactly where they were standing and what they saw to confirm that what they saw is the actual new moon. And then the Sanhedrin would declare, okay, the new month has begun. But then the word had to go out from Jerusalem. Now, even if you have a pony express and, relays of horses that are going to get the word out as fast as possible, in a non-digital world, there's a limit to how fast the word can go out from Jerusalem that the new month has begun. They also had signal fires in a certain period in history. If you ever saw the movie The Lord of the Rings, there's this very uplifting scene where, they realize that the good guys have a lot of allies and they're lighting the signal fires from one mountaintop to another. So they actually did that to signal that the new month has begun. They could actually cover a lot more ground if they could see a signal fire, 10 miles away on a mountaintop, light their signal fire and pass the word along. Nevertheless, there's a limit to how far it could get out there. And because of this doubt of whether the new month has begun or not, they adopted the habit, like they knew when the previous month began. So really it's only the question is only, is it going to be a 29-day month or a 30-day month, right? And so it's only a question of 1 or 2 days. And to account for the slowness in getting the word out that the new month has been declared, they adopted the habit of having 2-day festivals outside of Jerusalem. Not Yom Kippur, of course, but Rosh Hashanah became a 2-day festival. The first 2 days of Passover, the last 2 days of Passover. Shavuos is a 2-day festival outside of Israel. And the first 2 days of Sukkot outside of Israel. In Israel, only the first day of Sukkot is a full-fledged festival, outside 2 days. And again, with the end of Sukkot, same thing. Okay, so what happens? Pardon me, I did not disturb there. Okay. Okay, so what happens if you're outside of Israel, okay, but somebody's coming from Israel and they only need to observe it as a 1-day festival, right? And let's say they know which day it is. They know which day is the actual first day of the new month. Can they conduct themselves differently than the locals where they are, right? So that's the question we're going to be asking now. And let's read the Gemara. After discussing the stringencies resulting from minhagim, from customs, the Gemara elaborates on the second day of a festival observed in the diaspora, outside of Israel. Rav Safra said to Rabbi Abba, communities in a situation like us, who, based on calculations, already know the determination of the month. So here it's not about that somebody from Israel came and he's observing it for himself. Rather, we're in the diaspora, we're in Babylonia, right? So we're well outside of Israel. We're in the Jewish community in Babylonia. But, and by the way, you notice that now the Jewish calendar is completely determined, right? It has been determined for 1,000 years. We no longer have this testimony in front of the Sanhedrin about the new month. At a certain point, they were able to just mathematically predict when, each Hebrew month would begin for, ad infinitum into the future. It wasn't always that way. So what he's saying here is, okay, so they've got a few very sharp sages in this community who are capable of doing that exact mathematical calculation, so they know when the new month begins. They don't have a doubt. They don't need to rely on having a 2-day festival in order to make sure that the actual festival was observed when it was supposed to be observed. They know when the first day is. Do they need to observe the second day? Can they work on the second day? That's the question. So says Rav Safra to Rabbi Abba, so communities in a situation like us who, based on calculations, already know the determination of the month and are no longer concerned lest the festival be observed on the wrong day, clearly on the second day of a festival. So we do not perform labor in the settled area due to the need to avoid deviation that causes a dispute, as it is the custom in the diaspora to refrain from performance of labor on those days. However, right, so even though they know which day actually is the first day of the new month, and therefore 14 days later, when on the 15th, when Passover comes in, they know when it really is supposed to be. Why do they need a 2-day festival? But still, the custom has been outside of the diaspora. So he says, well, in a settled area, when we're around other people, we're going to follow the custom. We don't want to cause problems. But what about in the desert, where we're alone and nobody's going to see what we're doing, and we're not going to cause a dispute to arise around us by observing it on the correct day, right? Is that okay? Says Rav Safra to Rabbi Abba, yeah, we could do that. He says, however, in the desert, outside the Jewish community, what is the halacha? What is the law? He said to him, Rabbi Abba answered Rav Safra, he said to him that this is what Rav Ami said. In a settled area, it is prohibited, even though you know which is the correct day that the month started, you're just going to do what everybody else is doing and observe a 2-day festival. But in the desert, when you're alone, it is permitted to just observe the first day as a Yom Tov, as they would in Israel, and the second day you can go back to work, as long as you're not going to, because people see what you're doing and you're a sage, and that's going to cause dispute in that community. Since that's not on the table, you're all alone out there in the desert. Okay, so then you don't have to observe that second day. Tangentially, it is reported that Rav Natan bar Asya relied upon his knowledge of the calendar and traveled from Rav's study hall to Pumbedisa on the second day of the Festival of Assembly, meaning Shavuos, and thereby desecrated the second day of the festival by traveling beyond the town limits, the Erev Techumen, right? So he went further than he's allowed, his techum, his boundary, the same on a festival as it is on Shabbos. A person can only walk 2,000 cubits from his residence, or if he's in a town, 2,000 cubits from the edge of the town. Otherwise, he desecrates, if it's Shabbos or the festival, he desecrates. He has that same rule. So here we see that somebody is going to walk further than is allowed to walk on a festival. It's the second day. He knows it's not really the festival. He knows what day the festival fell on correctly. It was on the first day. So on the second day, because he's relying on the correct calculation, he says, okay, I'm not going to observe the second day. I want to go hear this Torah lecture in Pumbedisa. It's like his motivation is good. It's not like he wants to, get back to his business and make some more money. He just wants to walk further than would normally be permitted so that he can go hear a Torah lecture. He himself is a Torah scholar. But as we just said, if you're alone in the desert, okay, you can rely on having the correct calculation. But in a settled area where there's a Jewish community and people are going to see you, you don't do that, because your deviation from the norm is going to cause machlokas. It's going to cause a dispute. And he did that. And so what was the consequence? Rav Yosef excommunicated him as punishment for his act. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, let the master flog Rav Natan bar Asya for this grave sin, right? For a Torah scholar to just break the rules in a community that's filled with Torah scholars and just say he knows better, that really is a grave sin in the world of Torah scholars. So says Abaye to Rav Yosef, excommunication not enough. You should give him a flogging, give him lashes publicly. Let the master flog him. And Rav Yosef answered, actually, I gave him the more severe punishment. As in Eretz Yisrael, they vote to flog a Torah scholar, but they do not vote to punish him with excommunication in deference to the Torah. Apparently, excommunication is a more severe punishment than lashes. It's interesting because you might have concluded different, right? What they're saying is, so Abaye said, well, you excommunicated him, you should give him lashes, right? That's going to be more degrading to him. It's a more severe punishment. Answers Rav Yosef, no, actually excommunication is the worst punishment, because as in Israel, they want to give the worst punishment, and so they flog, but they don't excommunicate. In other words, they give the lesser punishment because it's a Torah scholar. right? If it wasn't a Torah scholar and they did this grave sin of just publicly violating the rabbinic decrees, they would give him the more severe punishment of excommunication. But because it's a Torah scholar, okay, we don't want to dishonor him publicly and announce that he's been excommunicated, so we just give him lashes. And, it makes sense, right? If you think about it, lashes would hurt a lot, okay? And it would be very humiliating if it happened to you, but then it's over. Your atonement is done. You've paid the price. Excommunication, that can go on for a long time. I don't think it would be permanent, but for a certain amount of time, you would be excommunicated from the community. That's very, very difficult, particularly for a Torah scholar. And so that's the worst punishment. In Israel, they won't give the worst punishment to a Torah scholar, but here out in the provinces, they will give that worst punishment because they really want to teach this guy a lesson, right? And where I guess in that Jewish community, which is outside of Israel, why are they willing to give the worst punishment and in Israel not? We can speculate about that. I'll come to the halacha in one moment. Some say that it was a little bit different how this went down. Rav Yosef ordered the court to give him lashes. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, let the master excommunicate him, as it is Rav and Shmuel who both say that one excommunicates for desecration of the second day of the festival in the diaspora. Rav Yosef said to him, that applies to an ordinary person. Here he is a Torah scholar. I did what was best for him, as in Eretz Yisrael, they vote to flog a Torah scholar, but they do not vote to punish him with excommunication. Rav Yosef did not wish to sentence him to so severe a punishment. Either way, we see that excommunication is considered a worse punishment than flogging. And there actually is an in-between punishment, and that is ostracism, right? So excommunication, it's like you're kicked out. You're just out of the Jewish community. Ostracism is that the sages themselves will turn their back on you for a certain time and they won't communicate with you, but you can still, go to the kosher market and buy things. You'll be permitted to do that. Excommunication is like you're completely outside of the entire Jewish community. For example, that's what happened to Spinoza, right? In the 1600s in Amsterdam, when he was excommunicated for his heretical teachings, a philosophy with respect to traditional Judaism was completely heretical, and that community excommunicated him. So let's see what the actual law is on these issues. So with respect to in a settled area, it is prohibited. In the desert, it is permitted. Residents of Eretz Yisrael who travel abroad with the intention of returning are required to refrain from violating the laws of the festival, even in private, when arriving at a Jewish settled area on the second day of the festival, right? So a person who lives in Israel, he only observes the first day of the festival. In Israel, it's permitted to work on the second day because they know when it is. That's how the custom developed. If this person goes to visit somewhere else outside of Israel, where they observe a 2-day rest period, right? 2 days of a festival. This person from Israel, his custom is only to do 1 day, but he shouldn't go where they don't work, and then he should not do work in a public place, because that would be sort of desecrating the festival as it's observed in that place. He should take on the stringency of that place, at least with respect to doing work. And certainly in a public place, and even in private, when arriving at a Jewish settled area on the second day of the festival. Since this custom is universally accepted outside Eretz Yisrael, outside the land of Israel, violating the halachas, the laws of the festival, in those circumstances is prohibited. Outside of a Jewish settled area, meaning like the desert, the travelers may continue to observe the accepted practice of the land of Israel, right? So if he's not in a Jewish community, in the place that he goes to visit outside of Israel, then he can just observe the first day of the festival as a day of rest and go back to work on the second day. However, one who does not intend to return to Eretz Yisrael may not violate the halachas, the laws of the festival on the second day, even outside of the settled area, right? If he doesn't intend to return to Israel, if he's moved to this place, he can't keep observing the leniency of Israel where they only observe a day of rest on the first day. He's now part of the community outside the land of Israel, even if he's not physically in a settled area where other people would observe him. With respect to a Torah scholar who has sinned, it is common practice to avoid excommunicating or even ostracizing a Torah scholar, even if he performed an action that carries that punishment. Rather, an attempt is undertaken to maintain distance from him. Right? So it seems like there's actually a fourth category of punishment. Right? There's flogging, there's maintain a distance, there's ostracize, and there's excommunicate. Right? So there seems to be four levels. However, if he deserves it, he may be flogged even with rabbinically ordained lashes for rebelliousness. If a Torah scholar sins and corrupts others to sin along with him, which is the real fear, right? When somebody who holds himself out as an authority then conducts himself in a sinful manner, the real fear is that he will lead others to follow his example. That's why we hold our leaders up to a higher standard than the average person. If a Torah scholar sins and leads others to sin with him, then he is excommunicated. And finally, one who displays contempt for the second day of the festival, in the diaspora is punished with ostracism. If he is a Torah scholar, he is flogged instead, in accordance with the second version of the discussion between Abaye and Rav Yosef. All right. Okay, now I'm going to skip a part of the page where they're talking about observing a custom, and they're going to liken this, and we have the Mishna that we're discussing also goes into this area of the law, where the basic idea is in the shmitah year, the 7th year, the 7-year agricultural cycle, so in the land of Israel, and this basically, it still applies today, but it doesn't fully apply. Right, so in ancient Israel, where the majority of the Jewish people lived in Israel, and it was ruled by a Jewish authority, so then every 7 years, as it says in the Torah, you let the land rest. You don't farm the land, and God will miraculously provide a super abundant crop in the 6th year that will be enough food for us to eat, not only in the 6th year, but also in the 7th year, so that we won't starve until we start planting the fields again in the new cycle, right? Which is the first year, the next cycle, rather than the 8th year. There's also the Jubilee year, the Yovel, which comes every 50 years. So when there's 7 cycles of 7, 49 years. And then there's the Jubilee year. That's when all slaves are released from slavery. And you would let the land lie fallow another year. So 2 years you wouldn't farm the land. That happens every 50 years. And God will provide a super abundant crop, right, in that 48th year to carry you through the 7th year of that 7th cycle and the Jubilee year, which follows, and people won't starve. Okay, so that's the Shemitah cycle. When you're in the Shemitah year, so you don't farm those fields, but you're just leaving them alone. Now, stuff is going to grow there, right? You've been farming there. There's certain crops that are only going to grow if you plant them. But there's other crops that just because you were growing things there, some stuff will grow in the fields. And then, of course, there's in the wild, there's going to be certain kinds of fruit that you planted in your orchard. It's just going to keep fruiting. You're not going to commercially pick those fruits. But as long as there is produce in the fields, and your own farm fields, you have to leave the gate open on the fence, right? So during that Shemitah year, something that happens to be growing there, it's ownerless. Anybody can go in and take it. Now, you also have the produce that you stored, right, in your storehouse. So there's a law that basically says the stuff in your storehouse, you can eat it in that 7th year. Now, this is not with respect to everything that you grew, because it's like, it doesn't make sense. They would starve. But with respect to certain categories like fruit, right? So like in like dates, for example. So you can keep eating the dates that you have in your storehouse as long as there are dates in the field available for the animals to go eat. But when they run out of what's available that anybody could just go pick for their own needs to eat, like the animals could pick it, you could pick it. You can't commercially harvest the way you normally would as a farmer. But as long as there's stuff out there in the fields that an animal or anyone could just pick and eat, then the stuff in your storehouses is also permitted of the same species of fruit. Let's say the dates in your storehouse. But when they become extinct in the fields, right? When there's no more dates out in the fields, then you have to remove the dates in your storehouse. There's a dispute about how you remove it. One opinion is that you need to destroy it. That's it. There's no more for anybody. The other opinion is, okay, you just put it out there in the street and anybody who wants can come and eat, but you can't keep it in your storehouse anymore. That's just one of the laws of the Shemitah year. Okay, so with respect to that and understand, and so now what they're saying is, well, let's say you're in a place where the dates are on the trees a little longer than they are in this other region where they run out of dates on the trees in the fields earlier in the year, right? So if you have some dates with you in your possession, because you go from where you are and there's still dates in the trees, you're allowed to own this stuff, but you go to a place where they've already run out of the dates in the trees, do you have to get rid of what's in your possession? That's the question that's being asked. And like the idea of working on the morning before Passover, the sages say you have to adopt the stringencies of both locations, right? So if where you come from, they already ran out, even though you go to a place where they still have, so maybe you have to just get rid of it because where you come from, that's it. They ran out in the fields. Or you come from a place where they're still growing on the trees, but you go to a place where they've run out of dates in the fields. So now whatever you have in your possession, again, you have to get rid of it because we observe the stringencies of both places. To understand that law, the sages are now going to draw a parallel, or it's not really a parallel, but based on the same issue of when you have to get rid of the fruit that's in your possession because it's no longer available out in the fields. So what happens if you take 3 kinds of produce and you put them in a barrel and pickle them together? So now like the flavors are mixing, like let's say you have pickled cucumbers, right, which are pickles, and pickled tomatoes and pickled, eggplants. I'm sure somebody could name a better set of 3 vegetables that might be pickled together. But the thing is, now they're all in this barrel, and let's say that out in the fields, the wild cucumbers and the wild tomatoes and the wild eggplants, they're going to become extinct. They're going to get used up out there in the fields at different times. So what about this mixture where they're all pickled together in your barrel? What are you going to do with that? That's the next question. So, all right. So with regard to one who preserves 3 types of vegetable preserves in one barrel during the Shemitah year, during the Sabbatical year, Rabbi Eliezer says one may eat all 3 vegetables based on the status of the first. In other words, one may eat all 3 until the date that the first of those vegetables ceases in the field. Thereafter, he is required to remove all the vegetables from the barrel, give them away. He can't be storing that stuff anymore. That's one opinion. Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is as soon as one of those vegetables is no longer found in the fields, all of them have to be removed from his possession. Rabbi Yehoshua says one may even continue eating all of them based on the status of the final type of those vegetables until it is no longer present in the field. Right, so you can eat all of them until the last of them is available out in the field. And then Rabban Gamliel has a third opinion, and he says any of the vegetables whose type has ceased from the field, he should remove its type from the barrel, as it may not be eaten. But the other ones you can keep in the barrel. And the halacha, the law, is in accordance with this statement. Right, so it's going to be more specific. You have 3 mixed in the barrel, but you're just going to remove, when tomatoes are no longer available in the fields, you have to remove the tomatoes from your barrel and give them away. And if once the cucumbers are gone in the field, you have to remove the pickled cucumbers from your barrel, etc. Ravina said, the dispute between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishna with respect to one who goes from a place to another in terms of, does he have to remove from his possession, is parallel to the dispute of these three Tanaim about the barrel. As we learned in the Mishnah, one may eat dates in all of Judea until the last palm tree, which produces the latest dates, in Tzoar has ceased producing dates. So now the question becomes, okay, so when you say that they run out in the fields, right? Where do they run out in the fields? Is it just like locally? Well, what's locally? Like just on, what's in view? My town, my region, my nation? What constitutes that in that area I have to remove things from my possession when they're no longer available in the fields? Well, how local is that rule? And so here we see that in terms of Judea, right? So Judea is the the Judean hills of Israel. That's where Jerusalem is. It's the portion of the Holy Land that was assigned to the descendants of Judah, right? Of the 12 tribes. So one may eat dates in all of Judea until the last palm tree, which produces the latest dates in Tzoar, right? So Tzoar is a part of Judea, has ceased producing dates. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says one may continue eating dates based on those that have fallen off the tree and are stuck between the palm branches. So even though they're not technically on the tree, they're still available out in the fields. But one may not continue eating on the basis of the dates that have fallen between the thorn branches, right? If they're falling between the palm branches, okay, animals can get at those dates and eat them. But if they fall between the thorns, the animals can't get at them, so they're not, even though you could see them, they're not available, and that means that they're no longer available, and so you have to remove them from your possession. So according to the first Tana in the Mishnah that was cited, one may continue eating fruit as long as an animal has access to its type, parallel to the opinion of the rabbis with regard to removal. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's opinion is parallel to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. If the fruit from a certain place is not available to all, one is required to remove it. Now that we've mentioned Judea as an example, that, okay, in Judea you can eat dates as long as the latest, the dates are going to be available to the latest period in this sub-region of Tzoar. So now what they're going to say is that with regard to this laws of removal in a sabbatical year, they're going to look at the Holy Land as three distinct regions. Since the Gemara discussed the point when sabbatical year produce must be removed in different places, it cites a Mishnah from Tractate Shevi'it that deals with a similar topic. We learned there in the Mishnah, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, is divided into three lands with regard to removing produce during a sabbatical year. What are they? Judea, Transjordan, and the Galilee. Right? So what's Transjordan? That's Jordan, right? Meaning the eastern side of the Jordan River. Judea is the western side of the Jordan River. And the Galilee is the north of Israel, like where Tzfat and Tiberias are. And there are three lands in each and every one of these regions: the valley, the mountains, and the plains, right? In each of these, in Judea, in Transjordan, and in the Galilee, there's the mountains, the valleys, and the plains. And in each of these areas, the halachas, the laws of removal, differ. And why did the sages say that there are three lands with regard to removal if those lands themselves are further divided? It is so that people will eat in each and every one until a certain crop ceases from the field in the last of the regions that comprise it. Therefore, even if a certain fruit is no longer available in a particular region within one of those three lands, it may still be eaten there as long as it is available in one of the other regions, right? So within Judea, so you can eat dates as long as dates are available in the field somewhere in Judea. But if there are going to be dates available later in the Galilee, that's not going to help you in Judea. So the people in the Galilee can keep dates in their storehouse longer than the people in Judea. if dates are available in the fields longer in Galilee than in Judea. And then the Gemara will say, from where are these matters derived? And Rav Chama bar Ukva said that Rabbi Yosef bar Hanina said, the verse says, with regard to the land during the sabbatical year, and for the cattle and the beasts that are in your land, all its produce may be eaten. That's Leviticus 25:7, from which it is derived, as long as the undomesticated animals eat a type of produce from the field, one may feed that type to the domesticated animal in his house, as it still remains in the field. What does it mean when you feed your domesticated animals? That you can benefit from that produce. Deriving benefit from that type of produce is permitted. However, if that type of produce has ceased for the undomesticated animals that are out in the field, you must cease providing it to your own domesticated animals in the house. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about that. And then we're going to do one more little incident and share the law about that. And then I'm coming to your questions and comments. Okay, the Gemara relates that Rav Safra, we mentioned him a little earlier tonight, Rav Safra left Eretz Yisrael, left the land of Israel, and he went to the diaspora, right? So he went from Israel out into the diaspora, probably to Bavel, to the Jewish community in Babylonia. And he had with him a jug of sabbatical year wine. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Ika, and Rav Kahana accompanied him. He said to them, is there anyone here who heard from Rabbi Abahu whether the halacha, the law, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar or not? According to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Rav Safra would be required to return the wine to Eretz Yisrael, right? So this wine that's from the sabbatical year, at a certain point when the grapes are no longer available out there in the fields, you'd have to remove it from your possession. Where do you do that removal from your possession? Do you do it where you are, or do you have to do it in the land of Israel, right? In this case, because he's left the land of Israel, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, no. When the removal happens from your possession of the sabbatical year produce, in this case wine, once the grapes no longer available in the fields, that has to be done in Israel. If you left Israel, you have to come back in order to remove it from your possession. But the rabbis who dispute Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar on this matter say, no, you have to remove it from your possession, but you do it wherever you are. You don't have to go all the way back to where you came from. So Rav Kahana said to him that this is what Rabbi Abahu said. The halacha, the law, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and one is required to return and perform the removal of the sabbatical year produce in Israel itself. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Ika, said that this is what Rabbi Abahu said. The halacha is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and one may perform removal wherever he may be. Then they're going to argue a little bit about, well, who got it right? Did Rabbi Abahu, what did Rabbi Abahu say? Is the law in accordance with Shimon ben Elazar or not? So then they're going to look at, well, who did we hear tell us what Rabbi Abahu said with respect to the law, the ruling of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and they're going to decide that the sage Rachava in the city of Pumbedisa is going to be a more reliable source for what it is that Rabbi Abahu said. And indeed, the second opinion is correct. Here's the law. If sabbatical year fruits that leave Eretz Yisrael, if produce that grows in the land of Israel during the sabbatical year is taken abroad, it must be removed wherever it is taken, right? Meaning once that produce is no longer available in the fields in Israel, at that time it has to be removed from our possession wherever we are. But we don't have to go all the way back to Israel to sort of return it and liberate it and make it ownerless and give it to whoever wants to come and pick it up. The halacha, in this case, the law, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, as is evident from both the Gemara here and the discussion in the Jerusalem Talmud on this subject. In addition, several authorities cite a version of the Brisa in which the first opinion is stated in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and the law is always ruled in accordance with his opinion. So you don't have to go back to undo this. Now, it's a very interesting question. It's pretty technical, and it's beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about here. How the laws of shmitah are observed today, right? Once Jews started living again in the land of Israel in large numbers, this happened in the early 20th century. These questions started coming up again. Should they be farming in the 7th year or not? Right? We're not in the same situation as in ancient Israel. We don't seem to have, God providing a super abundant crop in the 6th year. And the early immigrants, 20th century immigrants who are fleeing pogroms in Europe and going to the Holy Land, which is just a scrap, like a scrubby desert. There was hardly anything there. And they worked so hard to grow anything out of that rocky soil. If they weren't allowed to farm the land in the 7th year, they might starve. It was like a real issue. So there were certain rulings that were made. Rav Kook was part of this. And they basically said, we're going to have to come up with an out, right, where they can farm in the 7th year. So one way to create that permit, that heter, to allow them to farm in the 7th year was that in the 7th year, they would do a kind of symbolic transfer of the land to a non-Jew. So the Jew didn't own the land, and therefore it could be farmed in the 7th year. And they would, grow it and eat it, and then the land would return to their possession. It was just a symbolic transfer of the land. So that was one way out of it. Some people said, no, it's in effect, and we still need to do it. Some people will say, well, it's in effect, but it's in effect by rabbinic decree, not by biblical law. Why not by biblical law? Because we don't have priests serving in the temple, which is all part of it, etc. I don't have the whole thing to teach it to you in this 30 seconds before I go to questions. But it's a very interesting topic, and I'm sure we'll be revisiting it in much greater depth when we are actually discussing the laws of the sabbatical year. Here was just incidental to our discussion of following local customs. Okay, let's go to your questions and comments. Here we go. Pesachim, I don't know why that number is like that. Okay, but we're on page 52. Yeah, January 12th. Okay, here we go. Sharon Frant Brooks says, yikes! Who says preparing the home and food for the Seder is not work? Clearly written by those men who are the sages. You're saying you're cooking all day on the 14th. In what way is that not work? And that's why they actually do make this distinction between laborious work, right? Like you could actually, technically, you could be working at your desk also. Certainly you can be working in the kitchen, but you can't be breaking rocks out in the hot sun, as it were. Renee thought, is it true that we diaspora Jews must observe the stringencies for 3 years if we make aliyah? I don't know. Is that what you've heard? I don't know what I have no idea. I have not looked up that law. What Renee is asking is, okay, so outside of Israel, right, we observe the 2-day holiday. We already know that if we go to visit Israel, just as a tourist, and we're going to spend Passover there, then we should observe the 2-day festival while we're there, right, and observe 2 days of rest because that's the stringency of where we come from. Now we've just learned that, but if you're moving to Israel, okay, so now you're a resident of Israel and you would observe just the 1-day holiday. But what Renee is saying is that she's heard that maybe you don't fully become vested as a citizen, as a resident of the land of Israel, and therefore you only need to observe a one day of rest at the beginning of a festival until you've lived there for a few years. I haven't looked up that law, and I certainly don't know offhand. If somebody knows, let me know. Okay, Joseph says, minhag, custom, from what I understand, is custom and not halacha to cover your head while davening or donning a talis tefillin. Is it a violation with a penalty to refuse? Is it a violation with a penalty if you refuse? Okay, so Joseph is saying, it's certainly not written anywhere in the Torah that you need to wear a kippah, right? That you need to wear a kippah, a yarmulke, or that a Jewish man needs to keep his head covered. But it's a minhag, it's a custom that has absolutely acquired the strength of law, right? And likewise, so when you're saying morning prayers, do you have to wear a prayer shawl? There's not really a penalty for that. That's a very universal custom, although in certain Orthodox communities, unmarried men don't wear a prayer shawl until they get married. Tefillin, so a Jewish man is obligated to wrap tefillin every day of his life. Do you have to do that when you're praying? That is the custom, right? The obligation is to wrap tefillin every day, although not on Shabbos, not on festivals. So, in terms of penalties, all of these things, there's no flogging, there's no excommunication anymore. We don't live in that world right now. It's a custom that has acquired the force of law, right? It's not originally by rabbinic decree. It's very interesting. There's a lot to be said about, so why are we, it is not a commandment to keep our head covered. Why do we keep our head covered? I've talked about that in the past. The main reason is because we submit, right? We submit to God, and keeping our head covered is a reminder that we submit to God, right? And it's like we have to have a physical posture of submission to God. Keeping the head covered, it's another form of being a visible Jew, in a sense, flying the flag of being a Jew. And therefore, if you're going to be a visible Jew, you better conduct yourself in a way that doesn't embarrass the Jewish people and doesn't desecrate God's name. So there's definitely more to be said about that. But it is true that there is certainly no Torah law, and there never was a rabbinic decree that we have to keep our head covered. It just became the custom. But it is even discussed in the Talmud, right? So it's a very old custom, and for sure it has acquired that force of law that originally began as a custom. I think we saw it. Where was it? I think it was in Tractate Shabbos, or it might have been in Eruvin, and there was a mom who wanted her son to grow up to be a Torah scholar, and she, insisted that he keep his head covered from his whole life. So since it was worth noting that she did that, it meant that not everybody else was doing that. It was considered a greater form of piety. But at some point, it definitely became a custom with the force of law. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow. I guess I'll mention at this point that next week, I'm going to be taking the kids away for some, dad and kids time in the mountains. Nina is not going to be coming with us. And she's not going to be teaching AT daily. She's got her own material that she's going to be teaching, not every day. So she's going to teach a couple of classes. I believe her schedule is going to be also at 6 p.m. She's going to do Sunday and Monday for sure. And probably that's it, but maybe she'll do more. We'll see. What I'm going to do is while I'm away, I'm going to be learning. I'm going to be studying, but not teaching this class. And when I get back, the first couple nights, I'll sort of do highlights from the week that I was away, as it were. So if you're doing Daf Yomi, you should keep studying the page on your own. I will cover some highlights of the pages that we didn't do within AT Daily, and that's going to begin on Sunday. So I'll be teaching Saturday night. Sunday, Nina's going to teach an alternative class. It's going to be fascinating. You guys are really in for a treat. She won't be teaching the daily page of Talmud. She's going to be teaching other material, but it's going to be amazing. That'll be Sunday and Monday. So there may not be anything teaching. We haven't totally determined that schedule yet. I should be back next Friday, almost for sure. And then certainly Motzi Shabbos of the following week. But anyway, that's next week, all next week. Nothing is changing. Today's Tuesday. I'm here and teaching Wednesday, Thursday, Friday with God's help, and Saturday night as well. But then the kids and I are going to the mountains on Sunday. All right. That's letting you know what's going on. You should all be blessed with tremendous, everything you need. May you have everything you need. And shkoyach, may you be strengthened to learn as you've learned tonight and to keep learning and growing in wisdom every day. All the best.